The Watch Dogs games are quite hit and miss. Well, I say that, but there's really only one bad Watch Dogs game. Ahem. Back in 2012, there was a certain company that had a great and loving reputation. You may have heard of them, especially recently, albeit for all the wrong reasons. And that was Ubisoft, a once upon a time beloved studio. They introduced us to something called Watch Dogs during their E3 showcase in 2012, and suddenly it felt like something completely different from the usual. I remember seeing Aiden Pearce walk through a dark and depressing Chicago, hacking the environment in real time. The original Watch Dogs at first glance did not look like your standard open world game. It promised something revolutionary. It was marketed as this kind of perfect mix of technology and action, a game where hacking was the driving force. For a lot of us, it was the most exciting thing to come out of E3 that year. Well, that and maybe The Last of Us. Oh, and probably Assassin's Creed 3, and maybe Need for Speed Most Wanted. You know what, Watch Dogs was one of many exciting games at that E3 showcase. Thinking of it now, E3 2012 was packed, wasn't it? My god. Anyway, the pre-hype for Watch Dogs was tremendous, but so was the pressure. Ubisoft presented Watch Dogs as the next-gen experience, a game that would define the new console era of that time, being the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. The game was originally aiming for release in 2013, but you see it was delayed to 2014, further building anticipation but also raising some concerning questions. Would it live up to the promise of its great reveal? Could it deliver a new kind of open-world gameplay? Or would it fall victim to the weight of its own ambition? When Watch Dogs finally launched on May 26, 2014, which, fun fact nobody asked for, is the same day as my birthday, it had the pretty intimidating task of meeting sky-high expectations. For many people, the immediate question was not about the gameplay anymore, it was about the visuals. I'm sure you've all heard about the Watch Dogs E3 situation 1,000 times by now. Well, get ready because now you're about to hear it for the 1001st time. Did Watch Dogs look as good as the E3 footage? The infamous graphics downgrade controversy sparked many heated debates, with many people feeling deceived. Yet even beyond the visuals, the game's reception was fairly mixed. Critics and players praised its ambition, but questioned its execution. Was it really the groundbreaking experience we were promised, or just another open world game wrapped in a tech-heavy skin? For those of us who dove into Watch Dogs 1 at launch, there was a lot to unpack. The hacking mechanics were something very unique, but beneath the surface, some felt the game relied too heavily on familiar open world tropes. Aiden Pearce, the game's brooding protagonist, divided opinions. Was he a compelling anti-hero, or just a bland, edgy, hoodie-wearing wannabe Desmond Miles vigilante? Now, 10 years later, Watch Dogs occupies an interesting space in gaming history. It's a game that gave birth to a promising franchise, only for that potential to be overshadowed by the mediocrity of Watch Dogs Legion. Unfortunately, it seems that disappointment ultimately brought the series to an end. Well, that is video game wise. For some goddamn reason, they finished making a Watch Dogs movie that nobody asked for. Regardless, let's take a look at the original Watch Dogs 10 years later in all of its dark beauty. At the heart of Watch Dogs lies its protagonist Aiden Pearce, a man whose story begins with tragedy and spirals into a story all about revenge. The game introduces Aiden as a skilled hacker and vigilante, but his greatest driving force is, not about hacking or anything of that sort. It's simply guilt. Early in the story, Aiden's past actions as a hacker for hire catch up to him, in the most devastating way possible. During a routine job gone wrong, a hit is placed on him. While Aiden escapes unharmed, his young niece Lena dies in a car crash orchestrated by the same criminals that are hunting him. Now, this single event we witness near the start of the game defines not just Aiden's journey, but it also shows us the entire tone of the game from then on. From the outset, Watch Dogs paint Chicago as a city rife with corruption and so much surveillance, setting the stage for Aiden's personal war against the forces he believes are responsible for Lena's death. The game opens with Aiden tracking down a low-level thug connected to the attack. In a way, it's also a moment where the story can be wrapped up in a very basic way. We caught the bad guy, and that's all that matters, right? Well, not entirely. What I like about this scene instantly is how it immediately establishes Aiden's character. He's a man willing to cross certain boundaries in his pursuit of justice. Sure, he's not a superhero by any means. He's flawed, angry, and haunted by his failure to protect his family. As Aiden digs deeper, he realizes there's more to this than just a hit gone wrong. His investigation pulls him into a huge conspiracy involving Bloom, the company behind CTOS, the system that just, basically runs the entire city. This thing controls everything, traffic lights, cameras, you name it, and is collecting a ridiculous amount of personal data on everybody. The story brings up ideas about privacy, technology, and surveillance, and as somebody that is quite interested in cybersecurity, in fact I quite literally have a bachelor's degree in the matter, I knew this stuff would interest me, so I simply knew knew the story of Watch Dogs 1 would be one that I would enjoy. But then again, for me, it was also about Aiden's personal story and how far he'd go to get answers. And honestly, that journey kept me hooked. Now, Aiden himself is kind of a mixed bag to many people. I've seen some people like his determined anti-hero vibe, while others think he's boring and lacks personality. I know he's a divisive character for sure, but I actually liked him. Sure, he's quiet and reserved and he spends most of the time in his trench coat and baseball cap, but that stoic brooding vibe just worked for me. It made him feel like a real protagonist carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and while he's not exactly an emotional person, you can tell how much he cares about his family, even if he doesn't always show it in the best way. His interactions with his sister Nikki and nephew Jackson are some of the most human moments in the game. You see this man who's so focused on revenge that he struggles to connect with the people he's trying to protect. That conflict alone makes him relatable in a way that I did not expect. What I really appreciated about Aiden's story is how it pulls you into his mindset. You feel his drive, his pain, and his guilt every step of the way. Even when he's making some pretty questionable decisions, you simply cannot help but root for him. And that's what made Watch Dogs' story pretty good for me. It's not perfect, sure, but it's dark, gritty, and full of moments that really stuck with me. And for me, that's what makes the story memorable. The supporting characters really help make up for Aiden's quiet and reserved personality. Geordie Chin, for example, is a sarcastic fixer who brings a lot of humor and unpredictability to the story. Then there's Clara, this mysterious hacker who goes by the name Badboy17. She's an ally and sort of a guiding compass for Aiden, though her story could have been fleshed out a bit more. Clara and Aiden's connection feel real, and their chemistry hints at something that could have been the emotional core of the game, had it ever happened. Spoiler warning, even though this game is 10 years old, and I feel like I should not need to give a spoiler warning, Clara's death comes so suddenly that it doesn't hit as hard as it could have. We don't get enough time to really understand her backstory, her motivations, or the struggle she is dealing with. If the game had given us more insight into her life as a hacker, her ties to DedSec, and why she's so invested in Aiden Pearce, it could have added more depth to both her character and their relationship. Her potential was not just limited to the first Watch Dogs game. I could only imagine if she had stuck around, she could have played a big role in shaping the tone and direction of the whole series. By cutting her story short, the game missed out on a chance to create a more well-rounded story for her. And thinking of it now, what does her story remind you of? To me, it reminds me a lot of Desmond Miles. It seems like Ubisoft are very good at killing off characters and then later regretting it. And then there's also T-Bone Grady, a former Bloom engineer who's gone off the grid. He's charismatic, resourceful, and probably one of the most memorable side characters in this game. These characters definitely add some much needed personality to the story, but unfortunately they don't get as much screen time as they deserve. But on the flip side, that also makes sense. The game is heavily focused on one character alone, and that is the man himself, Aiden Pearce. The main story has Aiden unraveling this big conspiracy involving rival gangs, corrupt individuals or corrupt officials, and Bloom, the company behind CTOS. The villains like Lucky Quinn, a ruthless mob boss, and Damien Branks, Aiden's ex-partner, are solid obstacles for Aiden to overcome. But I won't deny the fact that some plot twists like the whole betrayal by an ally thing are kind of predictable. Even so, there are some really strong moments in the story that stick with you. One scene that stood out to me is when Aiden confronts Lucky Quinn in a private club. Instead of a big shootout like a lot of games of this similarity would do, such as, Mafia, GTA and so on, the way it's done in Watch Dogs 1 is certainly unique. Aiden hacks Quinn's pacemaker to kill him. In a way, that moment kind of makes you think about how much power Aiden wields, and it's all due to hacking, something that can be achieved in real life, and trust me, I know. Now don't take that as me saying I'm a hacker, that was definitely not what I meant, even though it did sound like that. That said, to be fair, the story stumbles a bit towards the end. The final moments feel rushed, and while Aiden does get his revenge, it leaves you wondering if it was even worth it. The game does not really dive into what justice means, or whether Aiden's methods are any better than the people he's fighting. Instead, it wraps up the conspiracy with a big few action moments and calls it a day. Looking back 10 years later, the story of Watch Dogs feels a lot like the game as a whole. It aims high for sure, and there are a lot of moments in this story that you can remember for a long time. Sure, maybe it could have dived more deep into its themes or characters. Aiden is more about what he does than who he is, and that works for the gameplay, even if it does leave the story feeling a little bit underdeveloped in places. That said, there are some truly great moments that stand out, and as a whole, I really enjoyed the experience. Sure, it might not answer all the big questions, but for me, it was a satisfying story that stuck with me. And hey, here we are 10 years later and I still remember it, so the impact was definitely lasting. The Watch Dogs series has taken us to some interesting places. Sunny San Francisco with its bright blue skies, and near future London packed with tech. These settings had mixed reactions. But before those, there was one city that most fans agreed with, which is a standout, and that was Chicago in the original Watch Dogs. The moment you first get access to exploring the dark and gloomy Chicago, you can tell it's not an ordinary depiction of any city. The developers really cared about making this one especially feel alive. Every kind of region or area of Chicago in this game has its own look and appeal. The Loop, for example, is all massive tall skyscrapers. The wards are rough and daring, and Parker Square gives off those suburban chill vibes. It's pretty clear that they put a lot of love into making this version of Chicago feel legit. One of the best parts of the game is how interactive everything is. Ubisoft could have very easily half-assed the design of Chicago in this game and created a city with no environmental storytelling. But for some reason, specifically for this game and probably this game alone, Ubisoft decided to channel their inner Rockstar games, which, yes, that sounded disrespectful to say, I apologize. In Chicago, you'll find NPCs walking around with boxes in their hands, NPCs arguing to each other, you've got this guy taking a picture of you, and so many more little details just by observing each NPC in this game. Now, thanks to our access to CTOS, the city's big surveillance and control system, you can hack just about everything. Traffic lights, bridges, cameras, and even people's personal information. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you might remember a video I made over a year ago scanning NPCs to find out who was the richest of them all. That video did very well, to be fair, and the idea really stood out, and whilst I did it in Watch Dogs 2, the concept actually started in the first Watch Dogs game. The ability to just scan random NPCs and instantly access their personal information such as phone calls, messages, income, jobs and other details is pretty unique. It's not really something we've ever seen in any other game, and it's such a cool mechanic that makes the world feel alive and interactive. Another great environmental detail with this game is, let's say you're being chased by the Popo. You can simply hack a traffic light or hack a steam pipe to cause some sort of pileup and shake off those cars chasing you. Let's say you need to look around different areas of a street. Well, the great thing is you can use the cameras to scope around. It's really all about using the city to your advantage, and it's super satisfying when you can pull it off. But you see, here's the thing. In a way, if you think about it, the ability to do all of this is kinda creepy, but cool. This system is watching everything all of the time. With Aiden's profiler, you can scan random people on the street and get a glimpse into their lives. Some of it is seriously random as hell. Like this guy who has a relative who was arrested overseas. I mean, why the heck do we need to know that? Or perhaps this fat dude running away that's allergic to latex. It's pretty fun just looking into the lives of every one of these NPCs. I mean, hey, imagine a certain group of people online saw this. They'd freak the fuck out. It's wild how these tiny details make the city just feel so alive, but at the same time, it's a reminder of just how invasive this system is. It makes you wonder, is Aiden really helping people or just crossing some serious boundaries? That goes back to the whole anti-hero thing. That said, I can't ignore the flaws in the profiling and the NPC's interactions, even though they are very impressive. Focusing only on the positives might give the impression that everything about them is perfect, which is not the case. But with this NPC profiling, the illusion begins to fade when you spend more time on it. The NPCs, while abundant, don't really offer much depth beyond surface level interactions. Sure, hacking into a random pedestrian's phone might reveal that they're deeply in debt or planning their next trip abroad, but these tiny details are entirely superficial. After a while, you start noticing the repetition in these profiles, and the uniqueness of each NPC begins to evaporate. But then again, is it even possible to make every NPC unique to their own situations? I doubt that, so I will give them the benefit of the doubt here. Now, one instant thought that everybody would have when just simply looking at Chicago in this game is none other than atmosphere. For example, the weather and the lighting bring it to life. Rainy nights are especially cool, with neon lights reflecting up puddles and the sound of rain in the background. Sure, it's not as it was during the E3 showcase, which is criminal by the way, but then again, was that showcase a pre-rendered scene or literal gameplay? Nobody knows. Even the people in Chicago add to the realism. They don't just wander around aimlessly, they actually do stuff, and I find this to be quite interesting. NPC patterns are not exactly common in Ubisoft games, because when I think of Ubisoft and NPCs, well, it's not exactly the best. But considering this game is over a decade old, it's still impressive how alive this city feels. When it comes to getting around in Watch Dogs, things go downhill fast when you hop into a car. You see, driving in this game is just plain bad, or at least that's how it feels to me. The handling is all over the place. Cars feel like they're sliding on ice, and the controls are so sensitive that even a slight tap can send you smashing into other cars or spinning out. On the flip side, there's also input lag. You press a button to turn and there's a delay before the car actually responds. And no, this is not a hardware issue. I played it on PS4 when it first came out, and more recently on PC with a controller, and the problem is still there. Another big issue is oversteering. If you try to take a sharp corner or dodge through traffic, your car can veer out of control like it's got a mind of its own. Sure, braking before a turn can help a bit, but the handling still feels so awkward and unnatural. The handbrake, which should make drifting around corners fun, is a complete gamble. Sometimes it works, and other times, well, you're spinning out or crashing into a lamppost. Is this realistic? Who knows? I've never tried driving like a fucking psychopath in real life. Now, if you compare it to games like Grand Theft Auto 5 or Sleeping Dogs, it really shows how much Watch Dogs 1 drops the ball. In those games, driving feels smooth and fun, but here it's like a punishment. For a game that relies so much on vehicles for missions and chases, this is such a huge letdown. Instead of feeling like a slick hacker in control, you feel clumsy and frustrated. It's no wonder so many people see the driving as one of the game's biggest flaws. There is a mod out there named 2013 Vehicle Handling, which to be fair does help with driving in this game. So if you're on PC, I recommend downloading this mod as it makes everything feel less stressful and like you're on ice. No open world game would be complete with side content, and in this case, Watch Dogs is a bit of a mixed bag. Some of it is genuinely fun and creative, while other parts can feel like a chore. But then again, Ubisoft are not exactly the innovators of incredible side content. In fact, what was the last game that they made that had incredible side content? And I mean 10 out of 10. Wow, that's actually a sad question. It's probably Far Cry 4, right? That said, the side content in Watch Dogs 1 is a huge part of what makes the game, so it's worth diving into. Criminal convoys are one of the more action-packed side missions in the game. The idea is pretty simple. Track down a car carrying a target and take it out. It sounds pretty easy, right? Well, not always. These missions can get chaotic fast, with armored enemies, guard cars, and sometimes the need to non-lethally deal with your target. The fun part is using your hacking skills to set traps, like steam pipes or roadblockers to stop the convoy in its tracks. But after a while, they do start to feel a bit samey. It's always find the car, stop the car, fight the guards. Still, if you like a bit of chaos, these missions deliver. When it comes to the whole crimes detected content, this is one of the cooler ideas in Watch Dogs. With Aiden's profiler, you can pick up on crimes before they even happen. You'll scan the area, wait for the game to tell you a crime is about to go down, and then swoop in to stop it. In a way, it's like being a digital Batman. Well, kind of. These missions are quick and satisfying, but they are pretty shallow. Once you've stopped a few crimes, you've basically seen it all. If you're into driving challenges, fixer contracts might be your thing. These missions involve time driving tasks, like transporting cars or outrunning pursuers. It sounds fun in theory, but you see, here's the problem that comes to light once again, and that is the driving in this game is, as I said earlier, not great. Still, if you're the kind of player that likes leaderboard competitions, there's a bit of replay value here. Just be ready to wrestle with the controls of your car. Now, the one side content that I genuinely enjoyed was gang hideouts. You're tasked with sneaking into a gang's base and either taking out or capturing a specific target. The fun part is how you approach them. You can go full stealth, which is what you should do, using cameras to scout and distract enemies, or you could run in guns blazing. But let's be real, stealth is where these missions really shine. The variety of locations, from parking garages to construction sites, keeps things interesting. Now, if you want something completely different, you've got the investigations and the digital trips. Investigations are slower paced, puzzle-like activities where you dive into the city's secrets. They're not exactly super exciting gameplay wise, but they add some lore to the game. Digital trips though are just as wild. They're like arcade style minigames where you do stuff like control a giant spider robot or play Burnout Paradise on the streets. They're very fun distractions, but they don't tie into the main game at all. Think of them as side content for when you just want to mess around. Now, I just went over what I believe is all the side content in the game, and now I present the question to you: why bother with them? Well, the obvious answer is the rewards, of course. Completing them earns you XP, money and new skills, which makes Aiden more powerful. For example, gang hideouts and criminal convoys often reward skill points, which you can use to upgrade hacking, combat or driving abilities. Fixer contracts are good for making money to spend on better weapons and vehicles. Even if some missions do feel repetitive, the rewards that they give you are a good reason to keep on going. Yes, the side content has its ups and downs. On the plus side, it gives you plenty of ways to experiment with Aiden's skills. On the downside, some activities like the fixer contracts are held back by the game's awkward driving mechanics. And let's be completely real, the lack of story depth in most side missions can make them feel like filler after a while. Unlike masterpiece games like your Red Dead Redemption 2s and Witcher 3s and so on, which are leagues above any Ubisoft game, the side missions in those games tell many stories that will leave you wanting more. Watch Dogs, on the other hand, leans more on gameplay than narrative. It plays it safe, and that's what it's trying to do. Before I wrap this video up, there's one last thing I want to talk about because it's pretty important. For years, Watch Dogs has had the label of being a GTA clone, and honestly, I get why. On the surface, they seem similar. Open world city, car chases, shootouts and a protagonist who always finds himself into trouble. Grand Theft Auto has nailed that formula, and any game that even remotely looks like it ends up being compared to it, whether it's fair or not. You know, that's just how things go. When something is as big and iconic as GTA, anything even slightly similar gets dismissed as a copycat or the inferior version. But here's the thing, saying Watch Dogs is a GTA clone completely misses the point of what it's trying to do. Even before it launched, the comparisons did start. And to be fair, this is Ubisoft's fault. One of the promotional material for Watch Dogs even threw shade at GTA 5, with a line saying 2 months are enough to visit Los Santos, making it pretty clear that Watch Dogs wanted to stand out as something fresh. It was not trying to be another crime-filled sandbox. It had its own thing going on. With its focus on hacking and a story about the dangers of surveillance, it was trying to carve out its own identity in a game that Rockstar completely dominates. And honestly, in some ways it worked. The hacking mechanics were super unique for the time, like causing blackouts, blowing up steam pipes, or grounding police helicopters. It was a cool twist on the open world formula and definitely gave the game its own flavor. But even with all that, GTA's shadow was impossible to avoid. Everybody knows about GTA, your friends, your family, your mom, your grandma. It's just that mainstream. So critics and players kept calling Watch Dogs GTA Lite, pointing out stuff like repetitive missions, awkward driving, or the areas where it didn't feel as polished as GTA. And to be fair, those comparisons were not totally wrong. Sure, Watch Dogs borrowed a lot from the open world formula, but if you played the game, then you'd know that Watch Dogs was never trying to be GTA. It was for players who wanted something smaller, fast-paced, and with a tech-driven twist. It wasn't perfect by any means, sure, but it brought something new to the table. So yeah, Watch Dogs will unfortunately always be in GTA's shadow, but I do think it deserves a bit more credit for trying to do something different in a genre where Rockstar is king. It was a flawless execution, but at least it had its own identity, and that's worth appreciating. So there you have it, that was Watch Dogs 10 years later. It's crazy to think that this game came out a whole decade ago. And fun fact that once again nobody asked for, but I will say it again, it actually launched on my birthday, which makes it feel even more surreal. 10 years honestly feels like a lifetime. What are your thoughts on the first Watch Dogs game? Have you played it? And if you have, how do you think it stacks up against Watch Dogs 2? Let's just quietly ignore Legion for obvious reasons. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really does help out. And with that said, I will see you in the next one.